In the news tonight, the Prime Minister arrives in Cairo to take part in celebrations of the October 6th war and holds talks with his Egyptian counterpart on Jordanian-Egyptian ties. Palestinians in the West Bank welcome a majority vote by UNESCO in favor of 6 decisions that strongly deplore Israeli aggressions against the cultural and historical heritage in the West Bank. And the U.S. President renews his call on congressional Republicans to pass a funding bill without conditions and end the ongoing government shutdown, now in its 5th day. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour, on a visit to Cairo, met his Egyptian counterpart Hazem Biblawi to discuss means of furthering Jordanian-Egyptian ties in various fields. Mansour said his visit, in his capacity as defense minister, aims to join Egyptians in their celebrations of the October 6th war. In his meeting with Biblawi, the Prime Minister recalled His Majesty the King's recent visit to Cairo, saying he was the first Arab and world leader to visit after the 30th of June revolution, meaning to send a message about the important role that Egypt plays on the Arab and regional levels. Mansour also expressed hope that pumping of Egyptian gas to Jordan would resume to the level agreed by both countries. Also in Cairo, the Prime Minister visited the Jordanian Field Hospital and checked on medical services provided to Egyptians at the orders of His Majesty the King following the recent violent demonstrations in Cairo. The hospital was set up in Ain Shams, one of Cairo's heavily populated areas. It has 20 beds and is run by a medical team of over 100, including doctors, nurses and technicians, and can conduct numerous surgeries in 2 fully equipped theaters. On a daily average, the hospital receives some 500 patients. Meanwhile, in Cairo, the army is planning public celebrations to mark the 40th anniversary of the Egyptian victory in the October War of 1973, which falls tomorrow. Tahrir Square and the vicinity of the Ittihadiyya Presidential Palace will be closed to traffic until Monday for the celebrations planned in public squares. The army has been deployed heavily in these areas to secure them, and Egyptian authorities warned the Muslim Brotherhood against staging violent protests. The military boosted its presence around Tahrir Square, and heightened security measures include some newly installed metal detectors on checkpoints leading to the square. It was on October 6, 1973, when Egypt's armed forces managed to cross the Suez Canal, breaking down the Bar-Lev line in Israeli-occupied Sinai. The victory reversed the strategic losses of the 1967 war and laid the ground for the eventual restitution of Sinai. Palestinians in the West Bank welcomed a majority vote by UNESCO in favor of 6 decisions that strongly deplore Israeli aggressions against the cultural and historical heritage in the West Bank and voiced appreciation of His Majesty the King's efforts in defense of those sites. Palestinian citizens who spoke to Jordan Television's reporter in Jerusalem praised the Royal Hashemite role in defending historic and holy sites in the West Bank and said they hope that role would continue.
There is a very clear role by the Hashemites and the Jordanian government in Al-Aqsa Mosque. There are agreements that put restrictions on the Israeli government, but Israel turned its back to these agreements and is committing unsound acts. If UNESCO is taking a stand in support of the Jordanian role, then this is considered a wonderful gesture, which we highly value. We hope for an end to these excavations and violations, and we hope that Al-Aqsa preserves its sanctity and status.
As far as I know, Jordan has never wavered its protection of the holy sites. We welcome this role and we hope that Al-Aqsa Mosque continues to be under the custody of King Abdullah.
Yesterday, State Minister for Media Affairs and Communications Mohammed Al-Momani said the Jordanian diplomacy led by King Abdullah has succeeded in rallying support for the UNESCO decisions. He said the Hashemite custody of holy sites in Jerusalem is a continuation of the historical, religious and humanitarian duty, and that Jordan will continue its political, diplomatic and legal efforts to protect holy shrines from Israeli violations. A session yesterday of UNESCO's 58-member executive board voted in favor of 6 decisions that strongly deplore Israeli aggressions against cultural and historic heritage in Jerusalem, Hebron, Bethlehem and Gaza. And back here at home, a Jordanian initiative for building, dubbed Zamzam, was launched in Amman today with the aim of establishing a national framework that can bring together all Jordanians from various political and social backgrounds. The initiative adopts the peaceful methodology of Islam and its moderate thought, as well as the principle of tolerance, cooperation and partnership. It also aims to promote good relations with state institutions, protect Jordan's unity, security and stability, as well as to strengthen democracy and civil society. Founding members of the initiative hope to draft a new national charter that places the kingdom's interests above politics and above all considerations and all within national consensus. The group includes liberal and centrist Islamists and independent activists advocating social, political and economic reform in Jordan. The 600-strong coalition will work to increase its membership base in the capital while establishing branches in the country's 12 governorates in order to build a broad coalition for reform. Over to Syria, a team of experts from the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, OPCW, left their hotel in Damascus, a day after the United Nations said Syria has given further details of its poison gas arsenal to the OPCW. The team will continue their task of eliminating Syria's chemical arsenal, a mission expected to continue until mid-next year. The team were in Syria to make an inventory of its chemical stockpiles and munitions to determine how and where to destroy them. Yesterday, the United Nations said that Syria has given additional details about its chemical weapons program and that the information is being reviewed. On the ground, meanwhile, fighting continues between government forces and rebels over control of Damascus and its suburbs. A video uploaded on the internet showed wounded women and children after a Syrian government shelling of the southeastern Damascus suburb of Mleha. Another video showed Syrian forces launch an air attack on the town of Taftanaz in the northern Syrian province of Idlib. In Iraq, which today was seen to multiple bomb attacks in several towns across the country. 8 people were killed and 24 were wounded when a suicide bomber blew himself up near a Shiite holy shrine in the north of Baghdad. Also in the north of the capital, another suicide bomber blew himself up inside a cafe in the town of Balad, killing at least 12 people. No group immediately claimed responsibility for any of the bomb attacks. Separately, unidentified gunmen shot 2 Iraqi television journalists in the northern city of Mosul. The journalists worked for Iraqi television channel Al-Sharqiyya News and were filming in Mosul when the gunmen opened fire. It was not clear who was behind the killings. According to the Baghdad-based Journalism Freedoms Observatory, over 260 journalists have been killed and scores kidnapped since 2003. The journalist syndicate denounced the killing as a criminal act, demanding the authorities track down the perpetrators and do more to protect journalists and the media. Tunisia's ruling Islamists began talks with secular opponents to prepare for a transitional government and elections to end political deadlock in the country. Observers say negotiations are still delicate, but moderate Islamist party Nahda has agreed it will step down at the end of 3 weeks of talks to decide on the composition of a caretaker administration and set a date for new elections. Up until the meeting began, there were concerns hours before that the talks might not get underway, as parties had yet to sign up to the transition process set out in a roadmap document.
There is no alternative for Tunisian or for the political parties aside from the national dialogue in order to prevent the country from further problems, troubles and foreign interference.
U.S. President Barack Obama implored House Republicans to pass a budget and end the ongoing government shutdown now in its 5th day. In his weekly internet address, Obama made his plea in which he cited examples of several Americans who have been affected by the loss of government services. He also blamed the shutdown on the far right of the Republican Party.
As I made clear to them this week, there's only one way out of this reckless and damaging shutdown. Pass a budget that funds our government, with no partisan strings attached. The Senate's already done this. And there are enough Republicans and Democratic votes in the House of Representatives willing to do the same and end this shutdown immediately. Unfortunately, the far right of the Republican Party won't let Speaker Boehner give that bill a yes or no vote. Take that vote. Stop this farce. End this shutdown now.
The government shutdown has shown no signs of coming to an end, with both Democrats and Republicans refusing to budge from their positions. The conflict over federal funding is also starting to merge with a more serious conflict over raising the nation's debt ceiling. Congress must act before the 17th of this month to raise the U.S.'s borrowing authority in order to avoid a government debt default. And a while ago, and in a rare moment of cooperation in the U.S. House of Representatives, Democrats and Republicans agreed to retroactively pay 800,000 furloughed federal employees once the government reopens. The House passed the bill unanimously and is expected to clear the Senate and be signed by President Obama. However, and just after the vote, both parties continued to blame each other for the shutdown.
We are looking at here again is an administration, a president that seems to be unwilling to sit down and talk with us. We have a majority leader in the Senate that seems unwilling to sit down and work out our differences. And, you know, it's really, if you think about it, it doesn't make any sense if the president has an axe to grind with the opposing party, why he would want to put the American people in the middle of that and enforce the pain on them.
We have substantively accepted what they are offering. We have procedurally tried to accommodate and allay their concerns. Let's open government. Give us a vote, Mr. Speaker.
The most complex, highly choreographed fireworks projection, lighting and live action show ever seen anywhere in the world lit up the sky above Sydney as Australia celebrated 100 years since the Royal Australian Navy fleet first entered the city's harbour. Fireworks were launched from Sydney rooftops, the harbour bridge and from decks of warships. They were accompanied by a light show projections telling the history of the Royal Australian Navy on the Opera House sails and choreographed flyovers from Navy and Air Force aircraft. The Olympic flame was handed over to the organizers of next year's Winter Games in Sochi ahead of a 123-day, 65,000-kilometer journey across Russia. The Russians, led by Deputy Prime Minister Dmitry Kozak, received the flame in a ceremony in the Marble Stadium in Athens that hosted the first modern games in 1896. The flame was lit last week at ancient Olympia and toured 33 Greek towns and cities before the handover. Tomorrow, Russian President Vladimir Putin will receive the flame on Moscow's Red Square before it begins its journey across the host nation. In the China Open, Rafael Nadal reclaimed the top of the men's world rankings after Thomas Berdych retired with a back injury during today's semi-final. While trailing 2-4 in the opening set, Berdych tweaked his back as he was running for a backhand slice and needed a medical timeout. He did return to court, but after a few points decided he could no longer continue, handing Nadal an easy passage to tomorrow's title round. The semi-final victory extended Nadal's winning run to 21 matches, and another win in tomorrow's final will give him him his first China Open title since 2005. In the second semi-final, Serb Novak Djokovic brushed aside Frenchman Richard Gasquet in 2 sets to set a final against Nadal. Although Djokovic was broken by Gasquet in the 4th game of the opening set, he came back strongly to advance and win 6-4, 6-2. And finally, a quick look at the weather forecast. Relatively cold weather continues tonight with partly cloudy skies and northwesterly moderate winds. Tomorrow, a further drop in temperature is expected with a chance for light rains in the northern regions. In the Gulf of Aqaba, it will be relatively hot with moderate to brisk winds and slightly choppy seas. Here now is a look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, his reminder of the day's top stories. The Prime Minister arrives in Cairo to take part in celebrations of the October 6 war and holds talks with his Egyptian counterpart on Jordanian-Egyptian ties. Palestinians in the West Bank welcome a majority vote by UNESCO in favor of 6 decisions that strongly deplore Israeli aggressions against the cultural and historical heritage in the West Bank. And the U.S. President renews his call on congressional Republicans to pass a funding bill without conditions and end the ongoing government shutdown now in its 5th day. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Halia Tuqan. Thank you for joining us and have a good night.